The Megalodon, thought to have went extinct around 3 million years ago. Could it still be lurking around in the depths of our oceans? Deep down in the darkness, the fiercest predator to ever roam this earth. Or so they say. Let's find out in today's episode of The Inexplicable. Hello and welcome back to The Inexplicable podcast, the only place in the known universe where leaving with more questions than answers means you're heading in the right direction. Today we're going to be looking at something that has absolutely fascinated me and the people I speak to, and it's one of those topics that I never get tired of looking at and just picturing it, and that is the Megalodon shark. Now, I'm fairly certain most people know of the Megalodon either from school or from reading online or the movies made about it. The Meg's kind of gone Hollywood at this stage, like that movie with Jason Statham in. But if you're not familiar with what it is, this will be a good listen for you. But essentially, it was an enormous shark that was at the top of its food chain, so it basically ate every other mammal around it. So we're talking whales, other sharks, etc. Apart from the physicality of the Meg, what makes this such an intriguing topic is that there are actually some people that believe it's still around and kicking today. So if it is, I'd like to know about it. But here I'm going to look at the evidence and see if I can come to a conclusion on the Meg's existence. And without further ado, strap yourselves in and let's get straight into it. What better place to start than looking at the sheer size of the Megalodon? They were anywhere between 14 metres long, all the way up to 23 metres according to some studies. And to give you some sort of perspective with them numbers, a regular great white shark that we have today come in at around 6 metres or maybe 20 feet. And another sort of perspective would be a school bus, so like an American school bus, the yellow ones, is around 13 metres long. So even just the length of this beast was unreal. We're looking at a 14 to 23 metre shark that's bigger than an American school bus. So can you actually imagine that animal coming towards you in the water? But the Meg wasn't just long. It was of course heavy too. The weight coming in somewhere between 50 and 100 tons, depending on the length. Obviously that would be proportionate to the length. And I'm going to give you another scale comparison to the weight, just so you can kind of comprehend just the sheer size of this thing. So let's say a Land Rover Range Rover, is about 2,000 kilograms. So if we're just going off the lower end of the weight estimations at 50 ton, you'd need 25 Range Rovers just to match the weight of the Meg. So can you imagine that? 25 Range Rovers on top of you, just to match the weight of the Meg. So just an immense specimen, you know. The Megalodon were great swimmers too, and this is kind of a misconception because they were so big and long. People think due to their size they might struggle, but actually to the contrary. They have a torpedo-shaped body to help them streamline through the water. So their cruising speed, so the speed they kind of roamed about at, was roughly around 3 miles per hour or 5 kilometers per hour, which may sound slow because I think we're used to the speeds of cars and aeroplanes and stuff like that. But in the water, it's definitely not slow. And it's in fact faster than all the sharks today. But to be honest, the Meg didn't usually speed around everywhere, so it wasn't one of those animals that would be sharp changes in direction fast, cutting into corners, etc. They kind of just cruised around, and that's kind of frightening because their cruising speed of around 3 miles per hour was faster than any speed of any other shark at the time. These sharks were just built to be the king of the ocean. They truly were. Now we've established that they were long, they're heavy, they could swim extremely well. What about when they got their teeth on their prey? Let's just say it would be devastating. Their teeth were massive and they were serrated too. So the size of them, they'd be approximately 7 inches. So like 18 centimeters. One single tooth, 7 inches. Can you actually imagine that? Piercing through your flesh. And to make matters worse, they likely had about 276 teeth. So if you can think about that, a 7-inch tooth, so practically a blade, a knife, and they've got 276 of them. It's honestly scary to think about. And these teeth sat inside of a monstrous jaw. The jaw could open up wide enough to engulf 2 people side by side. So somewhere between 9 and 11 feet wide. Just their jaw opening. Can you imagine seeing that? An 11-foot wide opening with 276 7-inch daggers in their mouth. But not only was their jaw wide, but damn, it could clamp down. The Megalodon had a bite force of roughly 6 to 10 times more than that of a great white shark, and at least 3 times greater than a T-Rex, a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So, I think that's pretty much all of the physicality covered. I know I've gone through it kind of fast, but I like to kind of keep this short and snappy. I hope I've kind of painted the correct picture of it in your head, but if I haven't, just search Megalodon on Google Images and that'll give you an idea. But essentially, imagine how scary a great white shark would be coming towards you in the water, then times that by 1 billion. That's basically the Meg. So, where did these killer animals prowl? Well, they actually roamed across all of the world's oceans, bar towards the Earth's poles. The young Megs really tended to stay near the shore, and to be honest, even the adult sharks preferred coastal regions and staying fairly close to the shore. But don't get me wrong, they definitely ventured out to open ocean too if they so desired. So to try and kind of pinpoint a home for these sharks, it's impossible, because at this point, fossils have been found in every continent except Antarctica. Now, saying that, obviously they did actually prefer warmer waters, so even though there's been fossils found everywhere, you could say that they preferred coastal warmer waters. So anywhere there would be warmer waters, and there's a shoreline and a coast, etc., they'd probably be more inclined to make that a habitat for them. And the warmer waters did facilitate their hunting lifestyle as well. So it comes to no surprise to anyone that these guys were right at the top of the food chain. I mean, let's be honest here. What could possibly take down something like this? Due to their size, they obviously required a diet consisting of large marine mammals, or things like whales, seals, sea cows, and sometimes even sea turtles. You might be thinking though, how do we actually know that they ate whales? Because that's a big accusation that they ate whales, and when we know how big whales are. Well, that would be from the whale fossils that we found. So we've found fossils from whales that have got massive indentations in them that match the shape and the size of that of the Megalodon teeth that we found. So that's how we can be sure that they were the absolute apex predators of their time. All in all, the Megalodon were actually quite crucial in their ecosystem. They kept the number of predators at bay, and thus helping population control ultimately. So although they were absolutely devastating, they were also extremely necessary at the time. I guess then the next logical question from there would be, if they were such great apex predators, how did they go extinct? There's only one thing that could eliminate an animal of that magnitude from the food chain, and that is, you guessed it, none other than Mother Nature herself. Yep, that's right, climate change was the demise of the Megalodon. Now, paleontologists believe that the significant shifts in the climate that occurred millions of years ago had a dramatic effect on the Meg. As the ocean temperatures began to drop, sea levels rose, and ultimately the Earth's climate changed massively. So the Megalodon, a warm water shark, really struggled in the colder water. Along with that, some of the prey colonies had migrated to find more suitable habits, and just to top it off, there was an emergence of some new predators like the great white shark, or even possibly early killer whales. So when you combine all these factors, it ultimately meant that the Meg was left behind with insufficient food to survive and just couldn't adapt in time. So although magnificent and they were absolute killers, they just weren't able to keep up with the changes of their environment. In terms of the fossils of the Megalodon, I did kind of briefly touch on it when I talked about the whale fossils earlier, but essentially all of the ones that have been found have been teeth. This is because sharks continuously reproduce teeth throughout their lives, so they could go through up to like 40,000 teeth in their lifetime, because they grow, then they drop out, they grow and they drop out, and they just keep doing that. Obviously, this means that shark teeth are constantly dropping onto the ocean floor. As well as the quantity of the teeth that were dropping, they're also the hardest part of the shark, as the rest of the shark skeleton is made up of like a softer cartilage, like our human ears and nose, like that kind of softer, bouncier cartilage that we feel. So the rest of the skeleton of the shark is made up of that kind of stuff, whereas the teeth are made up of a harder material. There are other bits of fossils, like some vertebrae, etc., but nothing close to anything substantial and full. However, there is one piece of evidence, or a fossil, that sparked huge debate on like Reddit forums and such, which is a baby Megalodon fossil. It's extremely well preserved, almost too well. It's said to be held in a private collection up until around 2018, I believe, where it was transferred to a Swiss museum from there. However, it seems very difficult to find anything about it other than 2 blurry pictures online, and this seems to be because no person of any authority has verified the fossil, and actually to the contrary, people have heavy criticism of the fossil, and in my opinion too, I deem it a fake too, for various reasons, but the main one being that if something like this was real, people a lot cleverer than me, shark scientists and paleontologists, they'd be coming out of the woodwork to discuss it, and I haven't seen any single person put their reputation on the line for this. That just points in the direction of fake to me, and the fact that there's nothing about it online. But yeah, so now the last part, the fun part in my opinion, sightings and conspiracies. As you can expect, there are tons of just plain fake accounts or even supposed videos on YouTube, which are just essentially great white sharks or CGI. I'm sure you've all seen the videos online at some point. But putting them aside, one of, if not the most famous account, being the 1918 Port Stephens sighting, reported by an Australian naturalist called David Stead, and it goes as follows. In the year 1918, I recorded the sensation that had been caused among the outside crayfish men at Port Stephens, when, for several days, they refused to go to sea to their regular fishing grounds in the vicinity of Broughton Island. The men had been at work on the fishing grounds, which lie in deep water, when an immense shark of almost unbelievable proportions put in appearance, lifting pot after pot containing many crayfishes, and taking, as the man said, pots, mooring lines and all. These crayfish pots, it should be mentioned, were about 3 feet 6 inches in diameter, and frequently contained from 2 to 3 dozen good-sized crayfish, each weighing several pounds. The men were all unanimous that this shark was something the like of which they had never dreamed of. In company with the local fisheries inspector, I questioned many of the men very closely, and they all agreed as to the gigantic stature of the beast. But the lengths they gave, on the whole, were absurd. I mentioned them, however, as an indication of the state of mind which this unusual giant had thrown them into. And bear in mind that these were men who were used to the sea, and all sorts of weather and all sorts of sharks as well. One of the crew said the shark was 300 feet long at least. Others said it was long as the wharf on which we stood, about 115 feet or 35 metres. They affirmed that the water boiled over a large space when the fish swam past. They were all familiar with whales, which they had often seen passing at sea, but this was a vast shark. They had seen its terrible head, which was at least as long as the roof on the wharf shed at Nelson Bay, one of the crew members said. Impossible, of course, but these were the prosaic and the rather stolid men, not given to fish stories nor even to talking about their catches. Further, they knew that the person they were talking to, myself, had heard all the fish stories years before. One of the things that impressed me was that they all agreed as to the ghostly, whitish colour of the vast fish. The local fisheries inspector of the time, Mr. Patton, agreed with me it must have been something really gigantic to put these experienced men into such a state of fear and panic. And that's the end of David's account. I know it was pretty long, but I think as the most infamous story on this, it deserves to be read out in full. So, now when we look at the details of the account and some of the statements of the men, for me personally, I feel like the shock and the panic of the moment seems to have kind of infiltrated the story. Was there a shark that day? I'd say absolutely yes. Was it a Megalodon? I'd say absolutely not. My theory kind of aligns with that of a writer called Max Hawthorne, who I know wrote a really nice piece about this very account. So you can check that out if you'd like. You just type in Max Hawthorne, Port Stevens account, and it should come up. It's a really good read. But essentially, I believe it was most likely a giant whale shark, which isn't actually even a predatory shark, but regardless, there are substantiated reports of these whale sharks, reaching 60 foot long. And there's even some unofficial claims of 75 to 90 feet long. So for me, I think in the moment, after a few beers, seeing a 70-foot shark jump out and eat those lobster pots, of course your mind would run rampant and exaggerate the size, because, let's be honest, who could give an accurate report of the size and scale in that state of mind? Now, these giant whale sharks, although they weren't predatory in the same way that the Megalodon were, it's definitely feasible for a curious shark or a really hungry shark to leap out and take a stab at those lobster pots to see what was there. The only real issue with the giant whale shark theory, it's not really an issue, it just makes it a bit more difficult, is the colour. The shark here was reportedly and unanimously very pale white, which whale sharks typically aren't. However, although they're not common, they actually do exist. So, imagine if you were the fisherman that day. All you would have seen was a 60 to 90 foot white shark devouring pots of full lobsters, and the 8-foot fin of the shark, that's what size they usually are, piercing the water. It would have been a sight to see, to say the least. But, regardless, I think it's safe to dismiss the 1918 Port Stevens account as nothing more than a giant whale shark who was hungry and curious. And as much as it saddens me to say it, the truth is the truth. The Megalodon really is extinct. So, anyway, I think that is a nice place to leave it here. I know obviously this one's been a bit shorter than the other ones, but that's just because a lot of the stories and conspiracies and supposed videos are just clearly nonsense. And I don't really want to go through all of them just for the sake of it. But in terms of the actual Megalodon, I think there's something about the ocean and the mysteries it may or may not harbour that just grips everyone. I mean, you can see from the success of the movies like The Meg just how popular it is. And even when it gets brought up in conversations around me, you can usually see people's pupils dilate a little and they get a little more focused, and it's kind of like, it feels like there's some mysterious music playing in the background. And to be honest, it's not even just the Megalodon. It could be anything ocean related, like the Bermuda Triangle or old shipwrecks or treasure at the bottom of the ocean. You know, people just seem to love the ocean, me included. Anyway, I think that's everything for today. I know there's been a bit of a delay getting the episode done just because I had a nasty chest infection, which obviously knocked things back a bit. But I think I'm in the clear now. I'm a bit stuffy, so if you could hear that in my voice, I do apologise. But onwards and upwards. As always, if I've said anything incorrect or that you disagree with, feel free to contact me on any of the socials or my email, which is in the description. So, thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time.